true?
Vanessa, the problem is that we have an epidemic of violence against women and girls in this country and in many other countries. The vast majority, and you cite this figure yourself, I think 85% of sexual offences are committed by, we assume, white British people. And when we talk about sort of foreign nationals, Boris Johnson was born in the United States. By some metrics, that makes him sort of foreign born. So these statistics...
Jenrick's just exposed the raw truth. 90 of Channel arrivals are young men, papers tossed, pasts unknown. Are British daughters now the experiment? Watch the clash before the establishment buries it.
And is he wrong to suggest that some of the men who come here illegally, A, have different attitudes to women, and B, nobody really knows who they are because they've thrown all their papers in the channel and nobody knows how old they are or where they come from or whether they have a criminal history or anything of the kind, and that they are grouped in large numbers in various of our towns and cities. They're not legally supposed to be working, so they're basically hanging around, and that if you did live nearby and if you did have a 12-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old, you genuinely might feel concerned for their safety. Is that fictional? Is that just inflammatory, or is it true?
Vanessa, the problem is that we have an epidemic of violence against women and girls in this country and in many other countries. The vast majority, and you cite this figure yourself, I think 85% of sexual offences are committed by, we assume, white British people. And when we talk about sort of foreign nationals, Boris Johnson was born in the United States. By some metrics, that makes him sort of foreign born. So these statistics are actually not always very helpful. I firmly believe that although there are cultural differences, of course, Afghanistan is not the same as Norway in terms of attitudes to women. That's absolutely fine and perfectly legitimate to say. And there's also nothing wrong with saying that people who come here, might be given sort of classes about sort of the ways and mores of Britain in the way that you would go, experience when you move to any other country. But the problem is that these offences are being committed by white British people who have been brought up under the society that you mentioned, and that people are fundamentally responsible for what they do. It's not a culture that makes someone do it. When we as white people do things, we don't have to speak for our entire culture or ethnicity or colour. But asylum seekers, for some reason, do have to do that. And that's what I object to. When Catholic priests were guilty of abusing children, we didn't sort of extrapolate from that sort of damaging indictments of Catholicism. We said that those individuals were responsible for what they were doing. And
I suppose, do you accept that there is a difference in people who are sort of interlaced through society? So, they're not all grouped in one place. They're not all sitting on one street corner. They don't all walk out of one building at the same time in a small town, a seaside town, a little city, in a kind of distinctive, kind of separate way. They're just, if somebody who is, has been a baker and worked in a bakery for 25 years assaults a woman, you feel as if he's operating alone. You don't feel as if he's part of a greater body that has just descended on that town and is sitting there and people can openly see, at a loose end with nothing to do, and then with, will get into trouble or mischief of some kind in a way that feels ominous. I mean, the greater, majority of people aren't in that particular situation, are they? So doesn't it put illegal migrants who are in asylum seeker hotels in a different category to some extent?
Well, I think that if you're concerned about that, and some people are, the answer to that is to allow asylum seekers to work, as happens in countries such as Spain, I believe, where they are able to actually sort of contribute to society, and that also means that they might sort of get fewer subsidies from the government, which should actually be welcome to a lot of people who complain about the money being allocated to those people. Those people, are already coming. They know that they are not universally loved here, and that obviously, when you have any cohort of the population, we cannot expect all asylum seekers to be saints. And so it's, statistically speaking, and this is terrible, I'm not defending it in any way again, but you might expect some people in that cohort of population, as with any cohort of population, to go on to commit some offences. Now, where I would disagree with people like Jenrick, is that you cannot then sort of extrapolate broad lessons from that, because people are people and some people will do really bad things. It doesn't mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater and say that we're sort of stopping the asylum system, or that we have a kind of collective punishment where you say that people from certain countries are not able to come to Britain at all because the wrong things that some of those people have done. In the same way that, you know, if a British person were to commit an offence, you and I would be grossly offended if we were then not allowed to go somewhere or do something because of something that someone else.
The moment Robert Jenrick put those real cases on paper, he did something the political class has dodged for years. He forced us to look at the human cost of pretending that every Channel arrival is a harmless refugee. I do not need to call anyone names, the numbers speak for themselves. In the last 4 years, the Home Office has quietly logged more than 300 serious sexual offences charged against people who entered Britain by small boat after destroying their documents. 300 is not a rounding error, it is a pattern, and it is growing every quarter. I know the standard reply: most sex crimes are committed by British nationals. That sentence is true but useless. It treats crime as if it were a lottery ticket handed out at random. In real life, risk is concentrated where policy is weakest. If a town suddenly hosts 400 young men who cannot legally work, have no family nearby, and were raised in places where a woman walking alone is viewed as fair game, the probability of assault does not stay flat, it spikes. That is not prejudice, it is probability. Let us talk about those towns. I have walked through the centre of Skegness on a winter evening when 2 hotels were block booked by the Home Office. After dark, you will see 20 or 30 men packing outside because there is nothing else to do. Local police logs show a 62% rise in reported flashes and groping incidents within a half-mile radius in the first 6 months after the hotels filled. The same pattern has appeared in Penzance, in Lytham St Anne's, and in rural parts of Kent. Each time the Home Office ships in a large group of unvetted men, the local women notice. The defenders of open borders say these men should be allowed to work. I agree, but only after we know who they are. Spain's policy of letting asylum seekers take jobs from day one sounds generous, yet Madrid still fingerprints every arrival and keeps a digital file. Britain does not even try. More than 80% of the Channel migrants in 2023 threw their phones into the sea before Border Force picked them up. Without a phone, without papers, without fingerprints taken on foreign soil, we are left with a name the person invents on the beach. That is not asylum, it is a cloaking device. The deeper issue is cultural. I have lived in the Middle East. I know how women are viewed in parts of Afghanistan, Iran, and Sudan. The men arriving from those places are not blank slates. When a culture teaches from childhood that unveiled women are loose and fair game, that belief does not evaporate the moment a dinghy touches Dover. Integration classes can help, but they are voluntary, underfunded, and run by charities more worried about hurting feelings than protecting girls. The result is what we saw in Telford, in Rochdale, and now in the seaside towns, grooming rings that flourish because social workers fear being called racist more than they fear a 12-year-old being raped. Some claim these comparisons are Islamophobic. I reject that. Israel faces the same question and answers it firmly. Every African migrant who crosses the Sinai knows that Israel will detain, identify, and deport those without a valid claim. Israeli courts still uphold Jewish values of mercy, yet they refuse to gamble with the safety of Israeli women. Britain used to act the same way. After the 1972 expulsion of Ugandan Asians, we took in 27,000 refugees in 6 weeks, but every adult was screened at military bases and given a work permit tied to their name. Crime rates among that group stayed below the national average because we controlled the process from start to finish. Instead, today we subcontract our border to people smugglers and then look shocked when the cargo turns out to include predators. The Labour Party and the Lib Dems tell us the real problem is toxic masculinity, as if rapists would vanish if only British boys were better feminists. I have daughters. I do not care about slogans. I care about whether the man walking behind them at night has already been flagged for sex crimes in France or Germany but slipped through because our database is empty. Here is what must happen. First, every migrant who arrives by boat should be held in a secure centre until full biometric checks are completed against every European police file. Second, anyone who destroys documents should face a presumption of deception, and have their claim fast-tracked for refusal. Third, local councils should be allowed to cap the number of unvetted men housed in any single postcode. Fourth, migrant men aged 18 to 35 should be barred from settlement in towns with populations under 50,000 until they have held legal employment for 2 years without incident. These are not extreme measures, they are the same rules Australia uses and the same rules Britain applied to Commonwealth migrants until the late 1990s. The moral argument is simple. A nation that cannot protect its own daughters has no business lecturing the world about compassion. Every time the Home Office dumps another 100 anonymous young men into a seaside hotel, it is gambling with someone else's safety. The women of Skegness, of Penzance, of every small town now on the dispersal list did not consent to that wager. They deserve the same security that Israeli women demand and receive. Robert Jenrick has started the conversation. The rest of us must finish it before the next headline is another local girl.